we know that there's going to be a Ukraine aid bill that passes here in the Support Ukraine Act. The question is whether or not the Support Ukraine Act is going to pass in such large margins that there will be no ability for the United States president to veto it. If that happens, then we have a guaranteed $9 billion worth of support, over $9 billion worth of support going over to Ukraine, at the same time that Rubio is telling senators under heat, under pressure in committee, that they're unlocking the $40 million that was passed again by Congress, but the Trump administration has chosen for months to let sit there and not send it over to the Ukrainians. The question would then be, at that point, how do you stop the Trump administration from blocking the over $9 billion in support offered? Making sure that he listens to a veto-proof majority. But I'm getting ahead of myself saying about at that step. First, there needs to be a vote. And then there's a question of how much the vote was won by, and if it's won by 2/3, then we're good. If it was won by less than that, then it is up to Trump not vetoing the legislation, which is far from certain, since Trump has been a staunch opponent of more support for Ukraine. And while the majority of this is not direct aid to the Ukrainians, there is aid to the Ukrainians of over $1 billion worth in this legislation. So there is a strong possibility that he will veto it, saying that this legislation is threatening the negotiations. If we showed the Russians that we're willing to support the Ukrainians, if we show the Russians that the war will get harder, if we show the Russians that the war will not get easier, then the Russians will come negotiate for some reason. It seems to be the logic. It's not good logic, but it is their logic, and they will be damned if they will be moved off of it. There seems to be some moves in MAGA world that could suggest otherwise. For example, you see Laura Loomer and her channel, despite the fact she was the one who promoted Boneface. You remember that like random American neo-Nazi that had a bunch of embarrassing face tattoos, made him look like a skeleton, who said he was in Azovstal and he got evacuated. Mind you, those who got evacuated on helicopter from Azovstal, I mean, you had to be pretty horribly wounded or part of a very, very select few. And the idea that they would take that moment to get Bonehead out of there is ridiculous. But because Bonehead was able to go online and and edit a very poorly done like Ukrainian military ID, she bought it, she ran with it as a story, and now, for whatever reason, Lauren Boebert's media empire is starting to do on-the-ground reporting in Ukraine, and the reporters are getting marginally better and better. And it is embarrassing that there is Laura Loomer's news brigade that is doing better work than some, number one, actual news publications, and number two, alternative media outlets that would otherwise not be too bad. So that's both embarrassing and also shows the ever-changing alliances in MAGA world and Republican town. Okay. So we're going to start with the Zelensky letter, and from there, also, I saw Steve Rosenberg got confronted by that Russian propaganda, Sasha. And I thought it'd be funny to watch that since we're obviously big Steve Rosenberg fans here. Okay. Let's start with this letter. So, President Zelensky has issued an open letter to Vladimir Putin. This was done on June 4th, at least Ukraine time. And it seems to be an angling towards two goals. Number one, an offer to end the war in Ukraine, and number two, a diplomatic positioning. See, by writing an open letter, penning an open letter to Vladimir Putin, Zelensky says two things. Number one, that he is willing to freeze the front line along the current line of contact, which is the offer. So basically a unilateral ceasefire, which is also what Trump was asking for on the campaign trail. And he said that he would cut off aid if the Ukrainians did not agree to it, and surge aid to the Ukrainians if the Russians did not agree to it. So it's off of that, Trumpian, pretty, generous to the Russians. I mean, they could continue to occupy roughly 20%, just under 20% of Ukrainian territory, continue their Russification programs. It's not an acceptance of these Russian annexations. It's not a forgiveness for all the Russian war criminals. It is not not an open letter for the Russians to continue in doing further invasions, but it is allowing the status quo, which is, not fantastic for the Ukrainians. And for the Russians, when it comes to amount of land that they're taking, I mean, they're taking 20% of the territory, roughly 20% of the territory from the largest country entirely within Europe. I mean, the territory being annexed is larger than some other European nation state, right? And the Russians, their argument to the United States has been, well, okay, but give us more. That's genuinely been their argument. It's give us more, give us the rest of the Donbass, give us, the rest of Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, Liman, Konstantinivka, Druskivka. You have to give us all of this. Give us the fortress belt line. And, you know, maybe later we're going to come back to the question of Kherson and Zaporizhia, which, according to the Russian constitution, is still annexed by Russia. And there's also, of course, if you look at the Russian Economic Forum, there's been some talk about the future of Odessa, future of Kherson. It's not like Russia views this in one or two little quick spats. Vladimir Putin was talking about during a recent interview where he was responding to a bunch of media, hey, you know, I could be in office until 2036. And so when we think about like 1 or 2 years, it is perfectly possible for the war to freeze this year and then resume in 4 in Putin's mind. Because it's not a question of, oh, Putin thinks he's going to be around for 1 or 2 more years, see the end of the war, and then he's going to retire, and he's going to go out there, and he's going to go into a farm field, and there's some romantic view of Putin kind of recluding into his private villa, covered in gold and riches, and just kind of letting Russia continue. Putin seems like the type of guy that probably would have to die in office, and then there would be a preceding power struggle if there was not a rapid decline in health that would lead him to step out of office otherwise. If there was not either A, his death, or B, signs that his death was near and upon us that could give him any time to make a decision to step down and prepare for that. Outside of those two scenarios, Vladimir Putin is thinking about staying around for quite some time. So just when you think about this offer of unilateral ceasefire and the Russians continuing to reject it, because the immediate reaction to this from the Russians was, well, you know, if they're serious about negotiating, come to Moscow. Considering the Russians have tried to kill them multiple times, they have tried to kill him at the start of the war, they have tried to kill him throughout the war. Not a particularly fair offer, not a particularly serious offer. So think about this in that context, the context of the screeching Russian war effort as the manpower issue presses the Russians forward, as the power issue when it comes to Putin not wanting a challenge from at home due to the loss of support for the war, and the economic issue, which is ever increasing for the Russians. And so that, combined with the fact that Putin very well could view this like, okay, we'll just take a pause and we'll come back around once it's easier. Think about that when Putin's reading this open letter that the whole world saw. When you came to power in Russia more than 26 years ago, many people in Ukraine viewed you positively. Now, this is how it was, but this is now in the past. If you go view at Ukrainian approval ratings of Russia in 2011, they viewed Russia more positively than the United States. They viewed actually, in fact, the United States as a bigger problem for global stability than Russia. Then came 2014, and then came 2022, and obviously the picture has changed greatly. But there was really like a friendly relationship generally amongst most Ukrainians between Russia and Ukraine. And the Russians have ruined that reputation so quickly due to their behavior during this war. That's not to say that the Russians have never acted historically in a negative manner, or there weren't Ukrainians that never particularly liked Putin or particularly liked Yeltsin. No, but that is to say, when you talk about general Ukrainian sentiment, it is not as negative as it is now. And that is entirely the fault of how the Russians have acted. When you came to power in Russia, oh, I read that. Now the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians view it positively, that our long-range drones paid a visit to the opening of your farm in St. Petersburg, covering a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. As you know very well, that distance is not the limit of our capabilities. For 26 years, your time in power has completely changed the agenda of relations between Ukraine and Russia. From the discussions about trade and other civilian matters, our nations have moved talking about exclusively about strikes and losses. Can I also say, just quickly, I do want to throw this out there, and I know this is outside the theming of a peace negotiation. I do feel that I kind of have to show the general tenor of how social media is now. The official Ukraine account is posting some quite interesting things in reference to the St. Petersburg oil refinery attack. For those of you who don't know, there's oil refineries around St. Petersburg, and there's also military assets around St. Petersburg. One example is a naval asset that was hit that I'm going to show you guys footage of in a bit. But the official Ukraine account posted this after there was this attack on the same day of a Russian economic forum in St. Petersburg that was occurring in the city, and obviously had to hear air raid sirens and the fact that this attack was going on. No time to read. This is from the official Ukraine account, government account. No
Time to read a list. Approved. Next. Approved. I don't know.
I mean, communication in 21st century. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm really ready for these type of like shit posts being like in international relations, where I see this in my feed, and it is now part of the news, part of the history books. Like these types of things, like in 80 years, this will be seen as like completely normal. This is not like in 80 years, like youth will be looking at this in history books thinking, oh, this is normal. This is how like communication is in digital era, digital age. You make little jokes like that. But so that weird feeling you're feeling right now is a unique feeling about this type of media, being in warfare, being in geopolitics, and it is a feeling that only our generation will feel and future generations will not feel. So that feeling you feel it to its fullest extent. But going back to this statement from the president of Ukraine. For 26 years, your time in power has completely changed the agenda of relations between Ukraine and Russia. From discussions about trade and other civilian matters, our nations have moved to talking almost exclusively about strikes and losses. You have spent nearly half of your 26 years in power waging war against Ukraine. Whatever you say about NATO, geopolitics, or the Russian language, this war is your personal choice, a war without a real cause. This is how history will remember it. Those years could have been very different. We often hear that you are comfortable with this war. Of course, not in those cases when it comes to the security of your residence or the parade in Moscow. Your own life is valuable to you. But now we can all see that Russians are finally becoming less comfortable with this reality, with the fact that the war is bringing more and more negative consequences to Russia. They do not like our drones and missiles. They do not like gasoline shortages and constantly rising prices. They do not like constant restrictions. They do not like your intention to launch a second wave of mobilization in order to expand the war into another direction in Ukraine or to use it against other countries neighboring Russia. They do not like the fact that there is no end in sight to your war. Yes, you can still force Russians to exist this way, but your resources are shrinking significantly. You will not have enough money or political capital to keep buying the loyalty of Russians the way you have for the past 26 years. And we will do everything we can to ensure that the world brings that moment closer. As you yourself like to say, we need to run the numbers. Yesterday, I received a report on the losses of your army on the front in Ukraine during May. Once again, the number exceeded 30,000 Russian soldiers killed and seriously wounded. We have been maintaining that level after month, and we have video confirmation of every one of your losses. These are not empty claims. We know that 63% of your battlefield losses are killed, while only 37% are wounded. In the 21st century, no army can afford such a ratio, and the share of those killed will continue to grow. It is not as if we in Ukraine are concerned about the fate of Russian soldiers after everything your war has brought to our country, but I do care about Ukrainians. We are losing our people, and every loss is painful to us. Even when the ratio of Ukrainian losses to Russian losses is 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, it still matters greatly. It also matters when you regularly postpone every few months your own deadlines for capturing our regions, especially the Donetsk region, and you will not capture it this year either. But we in Ukraine do not want a permanent war. We know very well that life without war is infinitely better, and we want to achieve that. I am convinced that the majority of Russians would respond positively to this as well, and you know it. Many did not believe that Ukraine would be able to hold out for so long. You did not believe it, and those who advised you did not believe it either. That was a mistake. You did not expect full-scale resistance from Ukraine, and you did not foresee that things would go this far. Yet, here we are, in the 5th year of the full-scale war. Do not be afraid to take the path out of this war. This is the main thing that is required of you now. Ukraine has preserved its independence, and it will preserve it, despite all predictions to the contrary. We have united many around the world to stand with Ukraine and against you. We have found the weapons and the financing we needed. We receive support, you receive sanctions, and this will continue until there is justice for Ukraine, the justice we seek and the justice that can be achieved. We will not allow those who are trying to convince you that sanctions against Russia will be significantly eased and that support for Ukraine will be significantly reduced without any meaningful change in your position towards Ukraine to succeed. The example of Orban shows how those who choose to help Russia in its war against us end in disgrace. Ukraine has endured harsh winters while you tried to destroy our energy system. We held firm, and even in darkness, the resilience of Ukrainians remained intact. We brought the war onto your territory, and you would not have been able to cope with it without North Korea's help. You are the first ruler of Russia to turn to Pyongyang for assistance, and today you are fully dependent on China, also for the first time in Russia's history. You believe Ukrainians would not have the strength to defend themselves, yet today our people are helping our partners in the Middle East and the Gulf build their own defenses. You hope for internal unrest in Ukraine. Instead, it was your own military formations that staged a mutiny against you. June 23rd will mark another anniversary of that event, and silence will not erase this fact from history. And now it is you, whom your officials, businessmen, and propagandists look at with obvious fatigue. The world can see it. The world has grown tired of Ukraine, as you long hoped it would. The world has not grown tired of Ukraine, as you long hoped it would. But there is growing fatigue with Russia, even among those in the wider world who help you bypass sanctions and keep your economy afloat. You cannot fail to notice it. After 26 years in power, age is beginning to take its toll. After 26 years. And with time, the fatigue with you will only grow. We have seen intelligence reports showing that you are now considering plans to continue your war into 2027 and 2026. We also know that you hope ballistic missiles will achieve for you what everything else failed to achieve. You want to draw Belarus even deeper into this war, and we are now forced to prepare for that as well. We see that you are trying to orchestrate something around Transnistria. Your propagandists threaten, in one way or another, every country neighboring Russia. Do you really want to go through all of this? The choice is yours now. Enough of war. Ukraine proposes to end this war. This must be done honestly, with dignity, and with guarantees that the war will not be reignited. We see that the United States is fully focused on the issue of Iran, and it would be wrong to simply wait until the war in Europe returns to the center of its attention. Ukraine proposes ending the war through direct engagement between us and you. I am proposing a meeting. Everyone heard your representative, smiling, say that I could supposedly come to Moscow. But after these 26 years, there is nothing for a Ukrainian leader to do in your capital, just as there is nothing for a Russian leader to do in Kyiv. There are countries that have traditionally hosted leaders to resolve issues of war and peace. Switzerland, Turkey, and the countries of the Arab world. Many are able and willing to host such a meeting. It is leaders who resolve the key issues. That has always been the case, and it always will be. I propose to set a clear date for such a meeting. We have heard that you were promised in Alaska the resolution of certain issues concerning Ukraine and Europe, but you can see for yourself that Ukrainians and European issues are not decided in Anchorage. Other agreed participants could join the bilateral track to be established between us. Since the war is taking place in Europe, and since Ukraine needs security guarantees, while you also seek security guarantees for yourself, it would be logical to involve those who can genuinely serve as guarantors. We believe Europe should be part of this process, those who truly have the capacity to influence the situation. We also believe the United States must be a part of this process. This is what could help shape a new security architecture for our part of the world. We've already experienced many agreements with Russia, including the Minsk agreements, that ultimately failed. That is why we must first find direct answers between us to the questions that remain, and not hide from difficult issues behind formulas, technical working groups, or endless time lost in shuttle diplomacy. Your war has set Ukraine and Russia apart. The front line today is the line from which diplomacy must begin. Ukraine is ready for a full ceasefire for the duration of the negotiations. This is standard practice, and current developments around Iran only reinforce that point. An attempt to reestablish real silence is the best way to begin talking to one another. We believe it would not simply be an attempt, but a real ceasefire, if that is what you want. You know that the United States has the capacity to monitor a ceasefire along the lines where hostilities stop. Ukraine is ready for an all-for-all exchange of prisoners of war, and this could become a good prologue to ending the war. Serious steps must be taken to return civilians and children who were taken away during the war. We must determine what kind of future awaits the generation of Ukrainians and Russians who will come after us. If you do not personally come to the conclusion that it is time to end this war, Ukraine will continue fighting for its existence. We will have those who support us, but you too will have to fight much harder for your own existence. Not Russia's, but your own. And this is not a threat from me or from Ukraine. It is a fact of Russian history that you know well. When Russia grows tired, change comes. We can work towards that fatigue. You can stop your war. Eternal memory to all those whose lives were taken by this war. Glory to Ukraine. So, number one, This is really good positioning from Zelensky. Number one, it's the redoubling down of what was Zelensky's already declared position of accepting a unilateral ceasefire along the line of contact, which many people that I talk to in discussions, both those that I agree with most of the time and those that I disagree with, most of them don't seem to know that Zelensky has offered a all for all frontline ceasefire, and the Russians just said no. When I hear people say, "Well, why don't we negotiate? Why don't we offer a frontline ceasefire?" A lot of negotiation talk that I have with candidates is just telling them that the Ukrainians have offered a ceasefire and that they did not demand Russia withdraw from every inch of Ukrainian territory for that ceasefire. They offered a ceasefire along the line of contact, a unilateral ceasefire completely along the line of contact, and they have offered it multiple times after being compelled by the Trump administration, and are now doing it on their own initiative without any compulsion from the Trump administration, without any threat of an intelligence cutoff or a supply cutoff, or even the use of an intelligence cutoff by the United States. This is completely on their own initiative when they're not in the spotlight, when the world is focusing on Iran. And so this right here seems like number one, a somewhat genuine attempt, but number two, great positioning for the world stage, showing that the Ukrainians continue to offer this, bringing attention to the fact that the Ukrainians are offering this, offering it on their own, strengthening the claim that they're offering it genuinely. And when it comes to the United States, there is a Support Ukraine Act vote tonight. Now, I don't know if it will get a veto-proof majority, but it will pass. It already got the discharge petition through, the vote to bring it to a House floor vote passed with a slightly bigger majority, and now that the stink of a discharge petition will be off of it in an official floor vote, there is a chance that a majority of will not only be a majority, but it will be a 2/3 majority. And if it is, then it's veto-proof. If it isn't, I mean, Trump, I think, will likely veto it. There's still a chance maybe he does it if he really wants to get this war over before the elections come around, and somebody is smart enough, maybe Marco Rubio or others, to convince him for at least a second, even if he flips his position immediately, that allowing this to go through, allowing Congress to do this, will put pressure on the Russians to come and negotiate in good faith, and then maybe, just maybe, he can get a peace deal done before the elections in 5 months, and it is only 5 months away. And with it being so close, and Trump seemingly not getting any progress when it comes to Middle East peace talks, they say, hey, we have a ceasefire, hey, the conflict is over, and then there's an attack on a Kuwaiti airport, an Indian national dies, dozens more are injured, the United States responds with its own bombing, the conflict is over, but we're bombing Iran, the conflict is over, but Kuwait is getting bombed, the conflict is over, but people are dying, the conflict is over, but people are being wounded, the conflict is over, but airports are being bombed. The conflicts are over, but the Iranians are talking about targeting American military bases. The conflict is over, but the Iranian state media doesn't seem to be speaking that tune whatsoever. They're continuing to get the public ready for war. And so that war might continue for another week. It might continue for another month. It might continue all the way up to immediately before the election. It might even continue until, even though I still think this is not the most likely outcome, it is not an impossible outcome. It might even continue throughout the election. And so the Trump administration might see the ending of the war in Ukraine as somewhat more achievable in the next 5 months if they can make the Russians believe that Ukraine will be too big of a hurdle to get around. They've realized by now you're not going to get the Ukrainians to give up Donbass. Steve Witkoff's Tucker Carlson podcast peace agenda is not going to pass the Ukrainian sniff test, and it's certainly not going to pass the European sniff test. And so they have to change the equation, as we've talked about on this channel so many times before. They have to change the equation if they have any chance of getting the war over, of getting it to a conclusion, of making the Russians think, you know what, continuing the war is a worse idea than ending the war. And doing anything besides that leaves too much risk for the war to continue or for the war to quickly reignite once some political or especially military or defensive concession is made that the Russians can immediately take advantage of, or take advantage of within a few years' time. Vladimir Putin wants to stay in office until 2036 if he could. And so, I mean, he could be planning for this war to end in 1 to 2 years and then planning to relaunch it in 4 years from his new positions ahead of the Donetsk region, or in Kherson and Zaporizhia, or with deeper dug-in positions in Kharkiv. Who knows? I do not want people to talk about this with no belief that the situation could get worse, or that the Russians just don't desire to make the situation worse. I mean, those who say, oh, that the war was going to happen. Oh, there was not going to be no war. Oh, well, now that there is a war, it's going to be over in 2 weeks. Why are these the people you first go to and believe their promises of, well, if we just give this little bit more, then it will certainly be over, and then we can just forget about the situation? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that these people are being listened to, first and foremost, by many alternative media programming. But putting that all aside, this seems to be both an advertisement to the Ukrainian people that Zelensky is doing his best to end the war but will not concede Ukraine's national interest. This seems to be a direct offer to Vladimir Putin to end the war. This seems to be a letter to the global community. This seems to be a letter to Congress and those taking a vote tonight in Congress, and potential legislators in 2027 who could also take a vote on Ukraine's support. Definitely if Democrats take back the House, especially if Democrats take back the Senate. And it also seems to be a letter directly to Donald Trump and his cabinet, those advising him, that they are still trying to actuate Trump's agenda, and that they're doing it on somewhat reasonable terms that Trump was asking for on the campaign trail, even though it's not what the Russians are asking for. And if you listen to Marco Rubio and you listen to Donald Trump, it's very interesting in the way that they're talking. Listen to this. Number one, Marco Rubio. This is 2 days ago. Well, 2 days ago, my time in Kiev, that is. Before Zelensky released this letter.
And back to your point that you made a moment ago, I don't think there's any doubt at this point in the minds of most observers around the world, and I would say in the minds of some inside of Russia, that the invasion of Ukraine has been a strategic disaster for them. They are not going to achieve the objectives they set out on day one for certain, and they may not even be able to militarily ever achieve the objectives they're demanding now in negotiations. I would also say that we have viewed it is this war has no military solution. It has to have a negotiated settlement.
I mean, but military action is part of the solution. You got to set the conditions for peace for there to be a peace, right? Or is it an extension of politics? You know, really basic quote, but I mean, it's true. And people forget that it's not as simple as like wars. There's like the big war switch and you flick it and it's off. That's why you really shouldn't start too many wars, if any at all, because once you flip the switch, you know, it's not like a, oops, let me just click that off. Now the people are dying.
To it. And that's the role we've tried to play. And it's been a difficult role to play because, frankly, we're not an impartial mediator. We sanction Russia, and we are providing and have sold weapons through the Pearl program, which has remained unimpeded, to the Ukrainians. Unfortunately, those talks have stalled in recent months for a variety of reasons. The Ukrainians have actually made some battlefield gains in the last month as well. The Russians are losing 5,000, not injured, dying. In fact, it is the first conflict, according to the Department of War, it is one of the first conflicts ever in which the death rate is higher than the casualty rate on the Russian side. It's the first time ever that you have.
This was a Ukrainian claim that Zelensky made in his letter that Rubio right now, before the letter was released, is echoing.
More deaths than casualties. So
it's not just a Ukrainian claim, it's now an American claim as well.
You're right. Not only are the Ukrainians bravely fighting, they're effectively fighting. So the role we want to play is if there's a way to negotiate this thing to a peaceful, because ultimately this is going to be, the end of this is going to be negotiated. But it's been difficult because the demands that both sides have in order to end it have been far apart to this.
Yeah, far apart, but taking no specific position on the demands themselves. So you say you're not impartial, but then you're not, you don't lack that impartiality enough to take enough action to actually end the war. So you try to balance and both be not impartial, but also be impartial enough to negotiate an end. So that puts you in a position where you try to have the best of both worlds. And it's like, oh, I want pickles and I want ice cream. And then you put both together and it's garbage. It's bad. Garbage. If you try to both be like, oh, I'm independent and I'm not going to be biased here, but also we're biased here. You didn't get a conclusion on the front of mediating an end to the war, and you don't get a conclusion on taking enough action in order to bring about an end to the war. You achieved neither, even though you tried to achieve both, which is the cornerstone of the failure of Trump policy here, even with Rubio trying to reel it in. Here is Donald Trump himself reacting to the Zelensky letter.
Crossing, as we were heading in here, President Zelensky wrote a letter to President Putin. He wants the two of them to meet to hash out the end of the war in Ukraine because he thinks you are too busy with the war in Iran. Is he right?
Well, I don't know. I'm glad that they're maybe talking about meeting. I think we had a lot to do with it. I know exactly what you're doing. But I think it would be great if they met. They should get it done.
Mr. President.
Crossing.
So right there, somebody could maybe say, oh, is that a journalist trying to bait Trump into attacking the Ukrainians by saying he's too busy with XYZ? No, maybe it's really hard to say. Trump seemed to at least think so. Either way, Trump didn't seem to take the bait if it was bait. And that's probably because Trump had said something actually similar in the days before this. Trump was very blunt about the idea that, hey, we're focused over here right now, to the point where we had Marco Rubio saying that they're essentially no longer mediating negotiations right now because they weren't getting anywhere. So he went from 24 hours to, we didn't get anywhere, and hoping that later they'd be able to mediate something. So again, showing the cornerstone of the failure of Trump's foreign policy, again, being Ukraine, trying to have your cake, eat it too, and then not having it. It's already gone. It's already gone. You didn't have it. You made it crap, and now nobody has cake. Either way, I think that this letter from Zelensky was smart from a domestic standpoint, smart from a trying to speak. If any Russian read this, the majority of Russians would have stuff in here that they agree with, and it would make them think. Obviously, the Russian government has been restricting the amount of information that gets into Russia, so the exact amount of effect this will have, I don't know. Plus, a lot of Russians obviously have negative views of the Ukrainians, so how much they'll listen to the words of the Ukrainian president, and I also don't know. Zelensky himself has been pretty not happy about how much the Russians didn't listen to him at the start of the war, despite the fact that his comedy, his performances was something that spoke to the Russian world, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it. Often, including big state performances and comedy shows where he would sing songs where a lot of the now same state broadcasters that sing on the bombing of his country clap for Zelensky. And so I don't know how much it will have an effect there, but there's also a political effect in Congress and the United States presidency that all makes sense to me. I think as a historical item, it's important. Explaining Ukraine's historical narrative as a diplomatic offer, it's important. And I think it was politically sad.